A fisherman used a crocodile as bait, and actually succeeded in catching a great white shark at sea, but just as he was locked in a battle of wits and courage with the shark, the tension on the fishing line suddenly dropped sharply. What could have bitten the great white shark, leaving nothing but its head? The next second, the yacht suddenly began to shake violently. At the same time, an equally bizarre incident occurred in a certain sea area of Antarctica. A U.S. nuclear submarine had actually lost contact, without any rhyme or reason. After 46 hours of intensive searching, the trace of this nuclear submarine was finally found, but surprisingly, the submarine was a full 5,000 nautical miles away from the place where it lost contact. Moreover, all 111 crew members on board had gone missing. When the rescuers boarded the submarine, they found no traces of struggle or fighting inside. Besides, all the equipment had been burned out due to an electrical overload. What was even more bizarre was that the food had been left there after only one bite. It was as if the crew had just left temporarily for some business. Dr. Serko, the leading biological expert of the team, seemed to have anticipated all this. After going back to the base, they got the submarine's recording black box. From the recording, it could be learned that the crew on the submarine seemed to have encountered a terrifying creature that had never been recorded before. What's more, even torpedoes couldn't defeat that monster. The recording came to an abrupt halt amid a burst of electrical static. This shocked everyone. There was actually a monster that even thermal weapons couldn't handle, but the ferocious tooth marks and claw marks on the nuclear submarine forced them to face this monster head-on. Just as Dr. Serko and his team were investigating the submarine accident, another research submarine arrived at the exact location where the nuclear submarine had lost contact. The leader of this operation was Laura, who specialized in marine biology research. As the submarine went deeper and deeper, Laura discovered that there was actually a volcanic crater here. Then she suddenly saw a streak of blue-green light flash outside and sink into that volcanic crater. But strangely enough, the radar showed no signs of anything unusual. This made Laura feel puzzled, and for this reason, she decided to go over to take a look. Soon the submarine arrived near the volcanic crater. It looked just like a mine shaft here. As the submarine went deeper and deeper, the depth gauge on board suddenly began spinning wildly. It was as if there was a huge force below, resisting the submarine's further descent. Laura keenly realized that some terrifying creature inside the cave was rushing out of it. They had to leave this place right away. But by this point, it was already too late. Luckily, Laura and the others finally went back to the research vessel safe and sound. Drawing on years of experience in marine research, Laura was absolutely certain that it was a species that had never been recorded before. The thought of this made Laura feel excited involuntarily. If this guess turned out to be true, she would make a name for herself. But soon Dr. Serko and his team learned about this incident. They immediately went to find Laura and questioned her in detail.
Any headaches since the encounter?
No.
Numbness on the left side of face or torso?
It was clear that Dr. Serko had a very in-depth understanding of that mysterious giant beast. At the end of their conversation, Dr. Serko persuaded Laura not to continue investigating this matter. The military took over Laura's research project. They confiscated all the records on the research submarine and removed Laura from the project. It was obvious that Dr. Serko, or rather the military behind him, was trying to cover up the existence of this giant beast. But for Laura, who was obsessed with marine creatures, being able to discover a species that had never been recorded before was worth sacrificing her life for, so she didn't take his words to heart. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, Richard was accompanying his younger brother to practice diving. Just then, they saw a colossal creature approaching them not far away. They quickly hid in a corner, and the giant beast didn't detect them because of this. But his younger brother's hunting instincts were aroused, and he immediately pulled out his harpoon gun and hit the giant beast accurately. Stung by the pain, it rushed into the deep sea recklessly. His younger brother was dragged into the darkness along with it and disappeared completely. Richard couldn't bear to abandon his brother, so he waited there all the time. It wasn't until his oxygen tank was almost empty that he reluctantly returned to the surface. Now Richard had to accept the fact that his brother had left him forever. On the other side, in a coastal town somewhere in the United States, a boy named Miles was surfing with his friend Phil and others, but because he turned too sharply, Miles fell into the sea. A girl planned to tease him while she had the chance, so she stopped Phil from going down to save him. While he was floating in the sea, Miles faintly saw something jump into the sea not far away. Before Miles could react, he saw a black shadow swimming toward him at high speed, and it was accompanied by a terrifying roar. Just when Miles thought he was done for, a strong beam of light suddenly shone in his face. With the help of the police, Miles managed to escape unharmed, But what happened that night shook him deeply. Miles tried to look up information about the monster online, only to find that only the legendary sea monster matched those characteristics, so Miles was convinced that what he had seen was the legendary sea monster. But his words were met with ridicule from his other friends. To prove that he was telling the truth, Miles even took Phil back to that stretch of sea again, but this time, they saw an even more bizarre sight. The surrounding area was littered with dead marine creatures, and the sea surface was also floating with many things that looked like animal eggs. Out of curiosity, Miles fished one out and took it home to keep in an aquarium. But in just one day, the water in the aquarium became very turbid, and all the fish inside had disappeared. Just when Miles was confused, the sturdy aquarium suddenly exploded, and all the electrical equipment around was subjected to varying degrees of electromagnetic interference. But what shocked Miles the most was undoubtedly the tail that flashed by in an instant. He hurried to chase after it to check. He found that the owner of the tail had left a trail of very sticky liquid on the ground. Following this trail, Miles came to his sister's room. He lied that he wanted to use the bathroom, and entered the room where the little monster was hiding. Miles immediately locked the door from the inside. He ignored his sister no matter how loudly she shouted outside. After rummaging through everything, Miles finally caught the little monster. Then he hurriedly took the little monster to the warehouse, and temporarily locked it in a fishing box. At this point, Miles had no idea that this little creature would completely change his life. Before long, TV news reported that the body of a strange and unknown animal had been found on a certain beach. An expert explained that it was a sperm whale, but Richard and Laura, who saw the news, both recognized it as the monster they had encountered before, so they hurried to the beach mentioned in the news. But they were still one step too late. The military had completely sealed off the surrounding area. The body of the giant beast had also been transported to Dr. Serko's laboratory. The team used jacks to pry open the giant beast's mouth. A thick spine on the giant beast's back could be clearly seen. Many hagfish were also parasitizing inside its mouth. This kind of creature feeds exclusively on carrion. It wasn't surprising to find them on such a giant beast, but what shocked Dr. Serko the most was that his assistant Singh claimed that this giant beast had lungs inside its body. This meant that it could breathe on land. Moreover, this creature seemed to be a mammal. Upon hearing this news, Jason, the military commander, was completely shocked. Later, they tried to cut through the giant beast's skull with a laser, but for some reason, the almost indestructible laser didn't even leave a single burn mark on the giant beast's body. The researcher in charge thought that the laser power was insufficient. He immediately turned the device's power up to the maximum, but even so, the cutting progress was still very slow, and for some unknown reason, many devices in the laboratory were subjected to electromagnetic interference and displayed strange screen glitches. Singh immediately realized that something was wrong and urged his colleague to stop at once, but the other person simply wouldn't listen, and so the tragedy happened. Singh was rushed to the hospital for treatment in time. Although his life was finally saved, most of his body was injured in the explosion. It could be said that he was completely disfigured. Just then, Singh's heart rate began to climb rapidly. In just a moment, it reached 300 beats per minute. This was a speed that no human being could possibly withstand. The medical staff rushed to perform emergency treatment, but an incredible thing happened again. Singh's heart rate dropped rapidly again, falling to 5 beats per minute in the blink of an eye. Even the doctors were at a loss for what to do. She had never seen anything so bizarre. The next day, Singh, who had been deemed permanently disfigured, suddenly sat up from his hospital bed. Then he unwrapped the bandages on his body by himself. The medical staff were about to stop him, only to find that there were no scars at all on Singh's face. His body, which had been blown to pieces, had actually healed completely. It was nothing short of a miracle. Laura chanced to meet Richard. After learning about each other's experiences, the two decided to investigate together. But since the beach was now under lockdown, they had to plan to sneak into the restricted area. That night, worried that no one would take care of her child, Laura even brought her son along with her. So when the two saw those hagfish, the little boy burst into tears in fright at once. The two had to take a few hagfish and hurry to leave the restricted area. After going back to her residence, Laura immediately took out the hagfish's stomachs and sent them to professionals for testing. To her shock, according to the test results, the genes of most of the substances inside belong to very common marine organisms, but a tiny fraction of them seem to come from Liopleurodon, and this marine creature is currently believed to have gone completely extinct 100 million years ago. Still in shock, Laura hurried to tell Dr. Serko the news. She hoped to join the team researching the giant beast. After hearing this, the other person asked Laura to meet him somewhere not Long after Dr. Serko arrived at the meeting place as promised, he didn't mention anything about inviting Laura to join the team. Instead, he asked her to take a plane with him. Later, the two arrived at a certain sea area, but for some reason, the whole area was filled with billowing water vapor. Dr. Serko claimed that those sea monsters were now burrowing everywhere on the seabed. A certain area had already been penetrated by them before. A large amount of seawater poured into it. All living creatures within a radius of 100 miles were swept away and devoured by the seawater. In the end, only a volcanic crater was left behind. Later, Dr. Serko used a specially made high-temperature resistant robot to go more than 40 miles deep into that cave. He managed to take a photo just before the robot broke down. He found that this kind of giant beast actually lived in the magma. It was clear that Dr. Serko was telling Laura just how dangerous the process of researching the giant beast was. He hoped that Laura wouldn't get too involved in this matter anymore. But how could she give up just like that? Since Dr. Serko refused to take her in, Laura immediately turned to look for other laboratories and tried to form her own research team. But all her actions were watched closely by Jason, the military commander. Jason immediately claimed that Laura's doctoral dissertation was fraudulent. He revoked her doctoral degree because of her record of academic fraud. No laboratory was willing to cooperate with Laura. This move was truly ruthless. Now that Laura was out of work, she had to apply for a job as a restaurant waiter to make a living. At the same time, Dr. Serko made a major breakthrough. He extracted a yellow viscous liquid from the splash of the giant beast's corpse. Experiments proved that this was exactly the substance that had made Singh's scars heal completely. Dr. Serko found that this liquid had excellent heat insulation properties. As long as it was applied to the surface of the body, one wouldn't feel any discomfort even if burned by flames. This would be the greatest discovery of the 21st century. If it could be made into a medicine, humankind would be completely free from the troubles of diseases. But at present, he had no time to study its ingredients, because Jason told the doctor that as those sea monsters kept burrowing underground, the global temperature was rising rapidly. Moreover, crustal activities were becoming more and more frequent. Volcanic eruptions were happening everywhere. Even some original hot springs were turning into new volcanoes. Dr. Serko knew that they must find a way to stop these sea monsters from continuing to burrow underground right away. On the other side, Miles kept the little monster as a pet. He even named it Nim. To figure out Nim's identity, Miles spent all day in the school library, constantly browsing through various marine biology classics, but he never found any similar records. Later, Miles also looked up a lot of information on how to train pets, and during this period, he accidentally met Richard online. Ever since that incident, Richard had been muddle-headed all day long. Every time he saw water, he would involuntarily recall the scene of his younger brother disappearing into the darkness that night. This had a serious impact on his life. Richard realized that he had to overcome this fear, so he had been searching online for psychological treatment methods related to sea monsters. It was because of overlapping keywords that he accidentally met Miles. With Richard's guidance, Miles soon established some connection with the little sea monster Nim. Now Nim was no longer as resistant as it had been at first, but towards other people, the little sea monster would still instinctively dodge. Every time before feeding Nim, Miles would ring a bell. Gradually, as long as he rang the bell, Nim would appear beside Miles. In the process of getting along, Miles noticed that every time before Nim ate, a burst of blue-green light would erupt from its body. Moreover, Nim could emit a strong electric current. Even the television that wasn't even plugged in would show some slight reactions. It was just that it wasn't yet proficient in controlling this ability. It would often discharge electricity involuntarily. One day, the whole family was having a meal together. A burst of blue-green light suddenly flashed in the backyard warehouse. The warehouse immediately burst into raging flames. Miles quickly guessed that Nim's ability must have gone out of control again. He hurried to the backyard at once, and following the lights that were flickering from the electric current, he finally found Nim inside the dryer. Miles faintly guessed that Nim seemed to prefer high-temperature environments over cold seawater. Luckily, Miles' family didn't delve into the cause of the fire. That was how Nim's existence was kept hidden. As time passed bit by bit, the relationship between the boy and the creature grew closer and closer. Apart from its somewhat strange appearance, Nim was almost like a cute little dog. On the other side, Laura, who was working in the restaurant, tightly held the tape she had secretly hidden on the submarine last time. She thought repeatedly about whether she should continue to persist. After a long period of silence, Laura made up her mind once again. She vowed to complete her research on the giant beast. Soon, a new opportunity appeared before Laura. A few days later, on a certain beach, a little girl told her mother that she had caught a big octopus while playing. Later, the woman found that the whole beach was covered with dead octopuses. This incident immediately attracted media attention. Laura, who was working in the restaurant, recognized that the octopuses in The kitchen, where the dead ones mentioned in the news. She suddenly thought of something, and immediately contacted her old friend George. She hoped to go to that sea area to investigate. George readily agreed. It wasn't long before the two arrived at that sea area. The sight that greeted her eyes completely shocked Laura.
What happened here?
If Dr. Serko had been there, he would have immediately recognized that these wounds were exactly the same as the ones on the nuclear submarine, just as Laura was. Trying to examine the wounds on the whales, roars rang out again not far away. It was clear that the giant beast hadn't left. Laura and George immediately chased after the sound to check it out, perhaps sensing their presence. The radar showed that the giant beast was fleeing in a certain direction at a very fast speed. Just as they were about to be completely left behind by the giant beast, the next second, the giant beast suddenly changed direction. It approached their boat at the same terrifying speed. If hit by the giant beast, the small boat would surely be smashed to pieces. They tried to dodge, but for some reason, when the giant beast drew near, a streak of blue-green light flashed. All the electronic equipment on the boat malfunctioned at the same time. Luckily, the giant beast didn't actually crash into the boat. Otherwise, the two of them would have been drowned at sea by now. At this point, Laura noticed that the giant beast was just circling the boat all the time. It didn't seem to want to harm them, so she plucked up her courage and jumped into the water. This was the closest Laura had ever been to the giant beast. She could clearly see the physical details of the sea monster. Amid her surprise, Laura quickly shot a locator onto the sea monster's body. Not long after, the giant beast left voluntarily. The electronic equipment on the boat also recovered again. Laura could clearly see the giant beast's position on the screen, but to her surprise, in just over half an hour, the giant beast had appeared more than 80 kilometers away. Such an incredible speed was truly terrifying to hear. Moreover, Laura noticed that the giant beast was still moving forward continuously. Its destination seemed to be a certain bay. To find out what the sea monster was up to, Laura immediately told George to head to the destination at full speed. At the same time, Richard's condition was getting worse and worse. It had even begun to seriously affect his life. He could now even occasionally see his younger brother waving at him beside the monster. This made Richard feel very tormented. He had gone to the hospital for treatment many times, but there was nothing the doctors could do about this psychological disorder. Finally, one day, when Richard was helping his neighbor fix a water pipe, he fell into that hallucination again. His mind completely collapsed, and he frantically smashed the pipe with a hammer. His wife saw the whole scene. Out of safety concerns, she resolutely left her husband and took their child back to her parents' home to take refuge. Now Richard was left alone in the empty house. Along with the pain, a sense of loss also crept in. He accidentally saw a newspaper report that the seawater in an area within a 100-mile radius had completely disappeared and turned into a volcano. Richard immediately guessed that those sea monsters must have been responsible, so Richard decided to face his inner fear head-on. He resolutely set off for that area. On the other side, since the warehouse had been destroyed in the fire, Miles and Phil temporarily moved Nim to the pool in the yard. One day, Miles' sister Savannah invited several of her girlfriends to the house for a party. Miles fell in love with one of the girls at first sight. After learning that she liked pets, Miles immediately told her that he had a special pet. He invited the girl to come and see it. The girl just gave him a half-smile. It was clear that she had heard too many such excuses before, but the girl didn't refuse Miles. She had a more interesting idea in mind. Led by Miles, the girl came to the edge of the pool, looking at the murky, moss-covered water. The girl became even more convinced that Miles had made up an excuse to trick her, so the girl claimed, "I have had an inexplicable fondness for you, ever since the first time I saw you." Miles believed her words completely. He was overwhelmed with excitement at this unexpected happiness, but just at the crucial moment, the girl interrupted Miles. She then asked her other girlfriends to join her in mocking the naive Miles.
You really think she liked you? Her last boyfriend was in college.
Miles felt nothing but overwhelming shame. Even the girl's pet dog joined in the mocking. But the next second, Nim, who had been hiding in the pool, suddenly launched an attack. The dog didn't even have time to react. Before it became Nim's meal, the girls were completely shocked by the scene, and Nim's existence was thus exposed. At the same time, Dr. Serko's research team detected a very weak positioning signal. Moreover, the signal was moving at a very fast speed across the Pacific Ocean. The staff reported the matter right away. The technicians immediately verified the signal. They found that the signal was actually coming from a portable animal tracking device. Combined with the recent incidents and the signal's unreasonable moving speed, the identity of the creature was already obvious. Dr. Serko could hardly believe it. Someone had actually managed to attach a tracking device to such a giant beast. They tracked the signal and also discovered that the giant beast was heading toward a certain bay. They immediately notified the Coast Guard patrol in that area to be on alert. Then they ordered the technicians to reverse track the signal source. to find the person who had installed the tracking device, just as Dr. Serko and his team were busy monitoring the sea monster. On a certain beach, a boy saw a man lying on the sand not far away. He approached curiously and found that the man's back was covered with strange wounds. Moreover, tattooed on the man's back was the submarine that had gone missing earlier. It was clear that this man was one of the missing crew members, but how had he ended up here? On the other hand, Richard, who had pulled himself together again, decided to go find Laura, because only someone who had also experienced the monster incident would believe that he wasn't crazy. Over the phone, Richard learned that Laura had actually attached a tracker to the monster, and she was now tracking the monster's trail. Excited, Richard immediately set off to meet her. Shortly after they met, an alarm suddenly went off on Laura's computer. Only then did they realize that the monster with the tracker had actually arrived at a certain coastline. Laura thought this was an excellent opportunity, because those monsters had never come this close to land before. She could take this chance to capture clear images of the monster, to prove that this mysterious creature really existed. The two of them set off quickly for the coastline, where the monster was heading. At the same time, Dr. Serko's team also found out through technical reverse tracking that the owner of the tracking device was Laura. Fearing that she would leak the secret of the monster, the military even proposed to kill Laura. Dr. Serko immediately objected. He also said that if anything happened to Laura, he would abandon this expedition. It was clear that certain qualities Laura had shown earlier had touched Dr. Serko, so the military dropped the matter. Later, Dr. Serko and the military personnel rushed to the location indicated by the tracker to find Laura. At this point, Laura, who knew nothing about all this, finally arrived at the coast. Like the countless other people around her, she raised her camera and waited quietly for the monster to appear. Laura couldn't wait to become the discoverer of this new species. A moment later, a strange ripple suddenly appeared under the water. The monster revealed a small part of its back. Even so, it was larger than an ordinary small fishing boat. The people on the shore were fascinated by this sight. They all guessed the true identity of the monster underwater. Just then, the Coast Guard arrived at the scene. To prevent the monster from hurting people, several ships quickly surrounded it. They kept sounding their sirens to drive it back into the sea. Sensing danger, the monster suddenly dived underwater. Just when everyone thought the monster had left, a burst of blue-green light suddenly erupted from under the water, and it was accompanied by a shrill sound wave. Everyone on the shore instantly felt a splitting headache. As the blue-green light continued to spread, all the surrounding electronic devices malfunctioned one after another. Even the electronic data stored in the hard drives was instantly destroyed. Not long after, Dr. Serko and his team arrived. They immediately completely sealed off the scene, and took Laura and the others away. Dr. Serko said that he greatly admired her courage. She had actually succeeded in attaching a tracker to the monster, without anyone's help. The doctor officially invited Laura to join their research team. He also offered to share all the relevant data they had collected so far with her. Laura originally didn't want to agree to him. After all, she had already taken footage of the monster. She believed that she could prove the existence of this new creature on her own. But Dr. Serko asked her to turn on her camera and check. Only then did Laura realize that in that beam of light just now, her camera had also been severely interfered with. All the footage she had taken was completely lost. After thinking for a long time, she finally agreed to join the research team. At the same time, at Miles' home, as Nim grew bigger and bigger, its existence became increasingly difficult to hide. Coupled with the fact that Nim had eaten someone else's pet dog a few days earlier, its existence was completely exposed. Now officers from the Animal Control Department showed up at the door, ready to take this unknown creature away. In this critical moment, Miles quickly called Phil. He asked Phil to take Nim away, before the officers could find it, while he himself stayed to stall for time. Later, the animal control officers searched the pool for a long time, but found nothing. Seeing that they hadn't found Nim, Miles finally let out a sigh of relief. But the next second, Phil told him a piece of bad news. Phil had actually hidden Nim in Miles' mother's car. Miles immediately realized that this was a problem, but it was already too late. Miles' mother had already driven to the supermarket to do some shopping. The two of them immediately chased after her. Not long after, Nim arrived at the supermarket along with the car. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was looking, it sneaked into the supermarket and wandered among all kinds of food. By the time Miles and Phil arrived, Nim was already completely immersed in the food. Based on Nim's characteristics, Miles followed the flickering lights affected by Nim to find its hiding place. He finally found the stealing Nim, hiding in a pile of nuts somewhere. He was about to take it away when Nim suddenly escaped. Unable to fully control its abilities yet, Nim caused quite a commotion in the supermarket. Before the security team arrived, Miles and Phil found Nim, which had sneaked into the warehouse, got stuck by a nail and trapped. Miles carefully pulled the nail out for it, perhaps because it was frightened. Nim turned around and fled again after being freed. The security guards who arrived later chased Miles and Phil out of the mall. treating them as thieves who had disturbed the peace. That night, Miles felt down and sad because he had lost Nim. Just as he was tossing and turning over this, he suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the window. Miles pulled back the curtains to check. To his surprise, he found that it was Nim tapping on the window. Miles happily let it into the house. Only then could he finally fall asleep in peace. He completely failed to notice that the wound Nim had gotten during the day had already fully healed by then. Dr. Serko's research team accidentally discovered a mysterious sea anemone on the seabed. This kind of sea anemone was completely different from those discovered before. It would actually change into different postures as the light varied. Later, Dr. Serko conducted gene sequencing on it, and he discovered an even more shocking fact. The genes of this sea anemone were actually a triple helix structure. Later, Dr. Serko noticed that some of the gene fragments had obvious duplication errors. They looked as if they were man-made. The doctor decided to go to Washington in person to report this major discovery to the senior officials. Dr. Serko asked Jason, the military commander, to prepare a plane for him. Jason agreed on the surface, but his expression was very grim. Not long after, the doctor suddenly died in an accident on his way to the airport. Laura never thought that shortly after she joined the team, Dr. Serko would die unexpectedly. Just then, she caught a glimpse of two of Jason's men passing by outside. They seemed to be paying close attention to Dr. Serko's matter. This made Laura suspect that Dr. Serko's death might not have been an accident. On the other side, Singh also noticed something unusual. There were suddenly many strangers around monitoring him. Singh faintly sensed that something was wrong. He immediately copied the doctor's research data, and then fled with that sea anemone. Unexpectedly, he was discovered by those monitors. Singh was no match for them at all. While fleeing, he accidentally crashed into the laboratory equipment. A long icicle pierced his body. Singh endured the severe pain, and got rid of the pursuers as quickly as possible. Then he quickened his pace and ran downstairs. Dr. Serko's death filled Laura with anxiety. She always felt that things weren't that simple. Then, she saw a mysterious man in black talking to her son by the sea. Laura immediately thought of Dr. Serko's incident, and rushed forward to protect her son in a panic, only to find that the man was just asking for directions, and had no intention of harming the child. Laura finally breathed a sigh of relief. It was clear that the doctor's incident had made her a little paranoid. But this very night, when Laura and Richard were watching the TV news, a loud bang suddenly came from outside the house. They hurried out to check and found that it was a car. The driver was none other than Singh, who had escaped from the research institute. He was on the verge of death at this point. Singh handed a key to Laura and said that all of Dr. Serko's research data was stored there. With that, Singh drew his last breath. If Laura had only suspected that Dr. Serko's death wasn't an accident before, Singh's situation now completely confirmed her suspicion. But Laura hesitated about whether to dig deeper into the investigation. This was clearly a very dangerous choice. One wrong move and she would be silenced just like Dr. Serko. Just then, Richard said that he hoped Laura would continue the investigation. Too many people had already sacrificed their lives because of this incident, and if Laura gave up now, all the previous sacrifices would be rendered meaningless. So Richard hoped that Laura would carry on with the investigation. After thinking it over all night, Laura decided to carry on Dr. Serko's unfinished work. Following the address on the key, she and Richard found an abandoned warehouse. The warehouse door was broken and could only be opened a crack, so the two decided that the petite Laura would crawl inside to check it out, while Richard stood guard outside. Inside the warehouse, Laura found the sea anemone hidden by the doctor. She had never seen such a magical creature before. Laura excitedly called for Richard to come and see it with her. At this point, Richard keenly sensed that some mysterious men had appeared around them. Richard quickly squeezed through the narrow warehouse door. They waited for what felt like an eternity, until all the mysterious men had left. Then they climbed out of the warehouse, carrying Dr. Serko's research data, and then they fled the place in a hurry. But what they didn't know was that Jason, the military commander, had already set up a trap at their residence, waiting for the two of them to walk right into it. At the same time, the returned Nim seemed a bit restless. It seemed to be very hungry, so it kept rummaging around for something to eat. Nim accidentally knocked over a bucket of salt, and then it started eating it in large mouthfuls. When Miles woke up the next day, he found the room in utter chaos. It was clearly Nim's doing. Miles had no time to clean up when his mother called him downstairs for breakfast and to go to school. Helplessly, he had to hide Nim in the closet first. Not long after, Miles' mother also went out for something. The whole house completely became Nim's territory. Nim dug a hole from the closet all the way to the ceiling. When Miles' mother came back in the afternoon, the state of the house was simply terrible to behold. Miles' mother angrily searched for the culprit but was startled by Nim, which suddenly rushed out. Panicked, she immediately went to find her husband. Miles' father kept tapping along the hole dug by Nim. He finally forced Nim out, and Miles' secret was thus exposed. His father demanded that he throw the little monster away. but Miles really couldn't bear to abandon it, so he came up with a bold idea. He took advantage of his parents' inattention, quietly climbed out of the room with Nim, then he took a small boat and sailed toward a distant island. There was an abandoned car on the island that had been there for years. Miles planned to temporarily settle Nim there. This way, he wouldn't make his parents angry and could still see Nim often. It took Miles several hours to finally settle Nim properly. Miles was exhausted and fell into a deep sleep right beside it. His parents, who were waiting at home, found that their son wasn't in his room. They thought Miles had run away from home. Because of what happened the night before, the two of them hurriedly called the police. By the time Miles woke up from his deep sleep and took the boat back home, the police had already arrived at his house. Miles mistakenly thought they had come to arrest Nim, so he resolutely turned the boat around and sailed back toward the island. At this point, the police and Phil on the shore had already spotted Miles. They also hurried to chase after him to the island. Phil was the first to find Miles. After learning what had happened, he suggested moving Nim to a safe place. Unexpectedly, just at this point, a policeman also found his way there, and he saw the little monster Nim. The terrified policeman immediately pulled out his stun gun, but the moment the stun gun touched Nim, a burst of blue-green light flashed. The policeman was electrocuted on the spot, perhaps realizing that it had caused a big trouble. Nim took the initiative to climb into the cage. Miles and Phil had to hastily take the cage and flee the scene. At the same time, Laura and the others went back to their residence with Dr. Serko's data. Just as they were about to open the door, Laura noticed signs of a break-in. She immediately became alert. Richard made a quick decision and took Laura to flee right away, to avoid being tracked by those people. They even threw away their original SIM cards. Then they slipped into a narrow path and headed for a remote cabin somewhere. Upon learning that Laura and the others had escaped, Jason, the military commander, flew into a rage instantly. But the other person had even discarded their SIM cards. Jason couldn't track them for the time being. The only thing he could do was order his men to get Laura back at all costs. Because of Dr. Serko's accidental death, the higher-ups sent investigators to ask Jason to assist in the investigation of the doctor's death. In the face of their questioning, Jason concealed a lot of information. He only briefly reported the fact that the doctor had discovered a mysterious creature. He didn't mention a word about the strange situation Dr. Serko had discovered from the sea anemone, which was the reason he was going to report it in Washington. After seeing them off, Jason dialed a mysterious phone number.
The situation is manageable. The investigation's gone.
On the other side, the escaped Laura and Richard had nowhere to go for the time being. They had to flee to the home of George, the friend who had helped her last time. After learning about Laura's predicament, George, who had been secretly in love with Laura, decided to help them escape the island. George borrowed a seaplane from a friend. The group used it to escape Jason's encirclement. This was an almost unknown island. The dock was stocked with all kinds of daily necessities, making it an excellent refuge for Laura and the others. After settling in, Laura took out the data left by Dr. Serko. She began to concentrate on studying what exactly he had discovered that had brought such a fatal disaster upon him. George looked at the sea anemone curiously. He had never seen such a magical creature either. He even almost dropped and shattered the jar. To prevent similar incidents from happening again, George put the sea anemone in the refrigerator for safekeeping and plugged it in casually. While going through the data left by the doctor, Richard was shocked to find that information about his younger brother was also included. It was clear that the military had known about the existence of the monster a long time ago, but for some reason, they had chosen to cover up the truth all this time. Thinking about his brother's death, a surge of anger ignited in Richard's heart. He pored over the data even more diligently, vowing to make those people behind the scenes pay the price. That night, Laura had planned to get a bottle of drink from the refrigerator, but she saw an incredible sight. The sea anemone, which had been contained in the jar, had actually broken out of it. Its hair-like tentacles had grown exponentially. Laura noticed that the sea anemone's vine-like tentacles had stretched into the power supply, and it seemed to be absorbing electric current. Combining all these phenomena, Laura deduced that this mysterious sea anemone was a brand new species that relied on electricity as its energy source. This couldn't help but remind her of the monster discovered earlier. That creature's abilities were also related to electricity. She couldn't help but suspect that there was some kind of special connection between the two. Later, Laura noticed that Dr. Serko had been using radar to monitor lightning storms and other weather anomalies for a long time. It was clear that Dr. Serko had already discovered this connection back then. Later, Laura also found in Dr. Serko's data that these monsters had frequently appeared in a certain sea area in a regular pattern. Perhaps all the answers were hidden there. To uncover the secrets, Laura decided to take the risk of venturing deep into that sea area. Since they lacked diving equipment, they decided to make a simple submersible, using the abandoned boiler in the backyard. At the same time, Jason, the military commander, was reporting to an elderly man, and there was actually a mysterious sea anemone on the man's desk as well. From their conversation, it could be learned that this elderly man had ordered Jason to eliminate Dr. Serco, and all of this was just to ensure that their Plan 8 months later wouldn't be disrupted by others. While the two were talking, in the depths of the South Pacific, countless monsters were marching in groups toward a certain place. Bursts of blue-green light flashed from time to time. Planes passing overhead lost control and crashed because of this. In their final moments, the pilots reported to the base that they had encountered a lightning storm, but the radar at the tower showed no signs of thunder and lightning in the surrounding area. Then the planes lost contact with the base. On the other side, Miles and Phil, who had fled with Nim, originally planned to sneak home to get some money and go into hiding for a few days, but they were spotted by the police right away. The police ordered them to put Nim down right away. Miles thought the police were going to harm Nim, so he resolutely turned around and ran away with the box, but before long, the two were blocked by a large iron gate. In his panic, Miles accidentally knocked the box over. Nim escaped from it, then it quickly scurried into the distant forest. Miles and Phil also forcibly broke free from the police's restraint, then climbed through the iron gate and disappeared into the forest together. Not long after, the two arrived at a small-town gas station with Nim. At this point, they were starving but penniless, so Miles called his sister. He hoped she would bring him some food, but what Miles didn't know was that the police were right beside his sister. So a few minutes later, several police officers arrived at the gas station. Miles thought his sister had betrayed him, but he had no time to feel resentful. He could only continue fleeing with Nim. They ran all the way and finally reached a certain seaside. At this point, Phil suddenly spoke up. He thought they couldn't keep hiding like this forever. He suggested letting Nim return to the sea. Although Miles was very reluctant, he also knew that this was the best solution under the current circumstances. By the time the police caught up, Nim had already disappeared into the boundless sea. To find out what was in that mysterious sea area, Laura and the others made a simple submersible, using the abandoned boiler in the backyard. Later, George transported it to the target sea area. Before departure, the group gathered together to pray that they would return alive. Then, Laura and Richard climbed into the submersible. George operated the hoisting device and slowly lowered the simple submersible into the sea. As the cable continued to unwind, the depth of Laura and the others' dive became deeper and deeper. They soon spotted some bizarre-looking deep-sea creatures. But just then, Laura suddenly noticed that the submersible's window seemed to be leaking water. She realized that something was wrong. George, who was operating the hoisting device above, heard this and planned to use the equipment to rescue the two of them. He wanted to conduct a re-inspection before continuing the underwater exploration, but to his surprise, Laura and Richard insisted on continuing to dive deeper. They had no more time to waste. Even if they were to lose their lives because of this, the two of them didn't feel the slightest fear, and so, the simple submersible continued to descend. They soon arrived above an underwater cave entrance. The water temperature around them rose significantly. As a result, the inside of the simple submersible became as hot as a sauna. Laura believed that this cave entrance was the underground burrow dug by the sea monsters mentioned by Dr. Serco. The two looked down from above and only saw a dim glow. It looked somewhat eerie and spine-chilling. Laura and Richard immediately decided to go deeper into the cave to investigate. As the cable continued to lower, the two inside the submersible suddenly heard a strange sound coming from all around. They thought it must have been made by the sea monsters. Laura immediately took out her specially made camera. This set of equipment could withstand the sea monsters' pulses. As long as Laura could take a photo of the sea monsters' true appearance, she could prove to the world that the sea monsters existed. Shortly after going deeper into the cave, the two captured an image of a section of the monster's body. Just as Laura was about to take further shots, George encountered an accident. After a shrill scream, all the power systems on the boat failed. The searchlights were also shattered by ultrasonic waves. George thought of the sea monsters Laura had talked about, and his face suddenly turned very grim. At this point, the two people underwater had no idea what had happened to George. They only felt that the cable had suddenly slipped loose. The whole submersible was uncontrollably falling toward the depths of the cave entrance. Laura frantically called out to George on the boat, but received no response at all. Luckily, the cave entrance had a few twists and turns. The simple submersible finally landed in a gully, and didn't actually plummet into the endless depths of the sea. At this point, Laura and Richard had already guessed that something had happened to George. They had to save themselves as soon as possible. Luckily, there was an escape dinghy on the simple submersible. As soon as it was inflated with gas, it would be ejected right away. The two had planned to use this to escape the deep sea, but the fall just now had caused the simple submersible to pin down the ejection port. The escape dinghy couldn't be inflated at all. To make matters worse, the cable was falling into the deep sea. If they couldn't escape in time, the cable, which weighed more than 2 tons, would drag the simple submersible completely into the abyss, perhaps affected by the sea monsters. The communication system completely failed. They couldn't even send the footage they had taken out through the system. As the cable fell completely into the cave, the simple submersible was dragged into the cave entrance once again. Only despair was left in the hearts of Laura and Richard inside. They hugged each other tightly and waited for the end. At the same time, Jason, the military commander, finally found the island where Laura and the others had been hiding, but by now, the place was already completely deserted. Jason saw Laura and the others' research data, and that marine map on the table. He vaguely guessed where the group had gone. On the other side, Miles and the others who had been arrested by the police were taken into custody on the charge of raising a monster, but there was no relevant prohibition in the law, so he wasn't sent to prison. But out of safety concerns, Miles' parents planned to send him to a fully enclosed militarized school. Unexpectedly, just then, Miles' sister took the initiative to plead for him. She claimed that her brother had become more cheerful while raising the monster. Persuaded by their daughter, Miles' parents gave up the idea of sending him to the fully enclosed school, but as a punishment, they required Miles to work as a volunteer at the aquarium. Miles was overjoyed at this outcome. When he saw those lovely marine animals, Miles couldn't help but think of Nim again. Just at this point, a colleague from the aquarium mentioned that someone had been attacked by a strange creature in the nearby sea last night. From the colleague's description, Miles recognized that it was none other than Nim. He couldn't wait to ask his colleague for the location, and immediately went to that area to check it out. When he saw the footprints on the ground, Miles was even more certain that they had been left by Nim. But then Miles' expression turned solemn, because he couldn't imagine that Nim would actually attack humans. The next day, the same colleague from the aquarium told Miles that he had just picked up some strange things from the sea. Miles immediately recognized them as the eggs from which Nim had hatched. At the same time, on the other side of the town, an elderly man was suddenly attacked by a mysterious creature while searching for something in the water. By the time the police arrived at the scene, the old man had already stopped breathing. From the wounds on the deceased's body, the police initially inferred that the old man had been attacked by a sand tiger shark or a black panther, but this inference had several doubts. First of all, the water area where the old man was killed was very shallow. Sand tiger sharks would never enter such waters. Secondly, there had been no sightings of black panthers in this area for 50 years. In addition, the police also found an electric shock mark on the old man's arm. This left the police unable to figure out what exactly had caused the old man's death. For a while, the aquarium director received a commission from the police to help find the mysterious creature that had killed the old man. The director took Miles to the town pier and asked the fishermen if they had seen any strange creatures recently. While observing the fish baskets here, just then, the director noticed that the fish in the baskets looked dull in color and hung their heads limply, and their mouths were bright red. The experienced director could tell at a glance that this was caused by prolonged starvation. But in the vast sea, how could fish possibly lack food? This made a doubt arise in his mind. Just then, a fisherman suddenly came to find the director, saying that he had indeed encountered a strange incident recently. According to what the fisherman said, not long ago, when he went out to sea to fish, he suddenly saw a burst of blue-green light erupt from the sea water. Then a large number of dead fish floated to the surface of the water. Many of these fish had signs of being gnawed on their bodies. By examining the wounds on the fish, the director found that they were exactly the same as the wounds on the victim mentioned by the police, so the director guessed that it was the glowing creature that had killed the old man. Just as the director was about to conduct a further investigation, the sheriff sent word, claiming that they had caught the killer. The director immediately took Miles to check it out. They found a huge crocodile hanging from a tree not far away. But when the director dissected the crocodile's body, he found that its stomach was also completely empty. It seemed that it hadn't eaten for a long time either. It was clear that the crocodile wasn't the one who had killed the old man. The director couldn't help but wonder what exactly had caused both the fish and the crocodile to run out of food. At the same time, on a fishing boat that was carrying out fishing operations, the captain kept complaining that their catches had been dismal these past few days. Just then, they noticed that there seemed to be a strange creature in this net. If Miles had been there, he would have immediately recognized that the sleeping little monster was none other than Nim. The captain and his crew took the opportunity to lock it in a cage. They planned to bring it back to shore and sell it for a good price. Perhaps sensing its impending fate, Nim kept roaring and crashing around inside the cage. The captain was driven to distraction. He immediately ordered his men to throw the cage into the fishing boat's cold storage. Unexpectedly, an accident happened on the way, causing Nim to escape from the cage. When the captain and his crew went to check the cold storage the next day, they found that the control system here had long been damaged. The cold storage had turned into a sauna. When Nim saw someone enter, it immediately pounced on the man. After a burst of shrill wails, the man covered in blood stumbled out of the cold storage room. He was still holding a sack in his hand. The crew kicked the sack a few times to vent their anger. Just then, a shrill scream suddenly rang out. The next second, the crew member fell to the ground, and Nim took the chance to escape from the sack, and jumped quickly into the sea. On the other side, after learning about those strange incidents, Miles was very worried that Nim would either starve to death just like the other fish, or be killed by that mysterious creature if it encountered it, so he planned to get Nim back. Miles recorded the bell sound he used during feedings into a tape recorder. After giving it a simple waterproof treatment, he threw the tape recorder into the water, and kept using the bell sound to attract Nim. That night, Miles saw a creature resembling Nim in that stretch of water. Phil advised him to be careful. After all, several cases of suspected attacks by Nim had occurred in the town, but Miles believed that Nim would never attack him. Then, ignoring Phil's dissuasion, he jumped into the water, but when Miles saw the creature, he found that although it looked like Nim, its size was a circle smaller. At this point, he finally realized that something was wrong, but it was already too late. The next second, many identical creatures emerged from the water, and surrounded Miles completely. Then a sharp pain shot through Miles' leg. Luckily, Phil on the shore noticed something was wrong in time. He pulled Miles out of the water just in time. Staring at the hideous wound on his leg, Miles dared not let his family know about this incident, so he secretly wiped off the blood he had left behind. Then he went back to his room to treat the wound on his leg. Unexpectedly, just at this point, his sister suddenly burst into the room. She caught sight of the wound on Miles' leg right away. She hurried over to ask anxiously what had happened. Miles hesitated for a moment, then told his sister about what he had gone through. Miles guessed that it was these creatures that had eaten the food that originally belonged to the fish. After finally seeing his sister off, Miles was about to rest, but he heard a series of strange roars coming from his room. The sounds were somewhat similar to Nim's. He immediately searched around. He finally found Nim, who had grown quite a bit, hiding in the closet, but because of the incident on the fishing boat, Nim was now very wary of humans. Although it didn't attack Miles immediately, it kept roaring to issue warnings. On the seabed, Laura and Richard, who had been falling, came to a stop again after a series of rolls. After this collision, the simple submersible was already overloaded. More and more water seeped into it slowly. Besides, the oxygen in the simple submersible was about to run out. According to estimates, it would only last for 1 more hour. If they couldn't escape before then, they would be trapped on the seabed forever. The two tried to repair the simple submersible, at least to get the power system working again. Then they would be able to inflate the escape dinghy. Perhaps they could escape from here. Through their continuous efforts, they succeeded in repairing the simple submersible's power system just before the oxygen ran out. But the next second, they were completely stunned by the sight before their eyes. Countless giant sea monsters were laying eggs not far away. After the simple submersible regained power, the light emitted by the searchlight quickly attracted the attention of those monsters. One of them suddenly rammed into the submersible. Luckily, Laura and Richard reacted quickly. They activated the escape dinghy immediately after being knocked away. Only then did they escape the pursuit of that giant beast. But new dangers followed one after another. After the two returned to the sea surface on the escape dinghy, they found a shark circling around them continuously. Based on Laura's experience, the two of them had now become the shark's prey. They would most likely become the target of its attack later. Upon hearing this, Richard immediately pulled out the signal flare gun he was carrying. Once the shark charged at them, he would shoot it immediately to kill it. At this point, Laura suddenly stopped Richard. Based on her observation over the past while, she believed that the shark had no intention of attacking now. She told Richard to wait patiently first. After all, this was their only signal flare. If they wasted it so easily, they would most likely end up stranded and die here later. Laura suggested observing for 20 minutes first. During this time, they could roar loudly to show that they weren't weak, which might scare the shark away. Richard roared loudly and kept slapping the water surface. According to the method Laura had described, to their surprise, the shark actually left voluntarily. After that, the two waited on the escape dinghy for George to come and rescue them. Not long after, a rainstorm suddenly hit the sea area. At this point, Laura and Richard were very hungry. Their previous experiences had left them physically and mentally exhausted. They were now on the verge of collapse, but the two of them didn't give up. Because of this, just then, they spotted a piece of seaweed nearby. In order to hold on until rescue arrived, the two devoured the piece of seaweed ravenously. As night fell, the two had been stranded for more than 20 hours. They still hadn't waited for George, but not far from this sea area, several coast guards discovered a fishing boat. The boat was in a state of utter chaos, as if it had been attacked by something. In the corner, there were also a lot of dried bloodstains and discarded bullet casings. It was clear that a fierce battle had taken place here, but in the end, the police didn't find any remains. If nothing had gone wrong, the people on board would have already become the monster's meal. The Coast Guards could only confirm from the remaining photo that the owner of this boat was none other than George. After being soaked for a long time, the dinghy that Laura and Richard were on began to leak. This made their situation even worse. Just then, the two saw bursts of blue-green light surging on the sea not far away. It looked somewhat like lightning. The next second, a giant beast suddenly attacked their dinghy from below. Although Laura and Richard weren't seriously injured, the dinghy was severely damaged. The two had to cling to the wreckage of the dinghy and drift along with the waves. They had no idea where they would end up. Suddenly, Laura spotted something floating not far away. Upon taking a closer look, it turned out to be a pile of eggs she had never seen before. She immediately guessed that these were the eggs of those sea monsters. The reason why the monster had attacked the dinghy just now was most likely that it had regarded them as intruders. By accident, Laura accidentally crushed one of the monster eggs. A liquid emitting green fluorescence immediately oozed out. At this point, Laura suddenly had an idea. She kept crushing the monster eggs, using the emitted fluorescence to attract the attention of people in the nearby sea area. Luckily, a helicopter really flew over the sea area. Richard quickly pulled out the signal flare gun. The helicopter quickly approached the two of them, but just then, an accident happened once again. Although the helicopter managed to escape by a stroke of luck, the hearts of Richard and Laura turned completely cold. The two thought that the helicopter wouldn't come back. They were going to die in this sea area. Just then, a dazzling beam of light shone down on the two of them. The helicopter had actually turned around and come back. After drifting for a long time, Laura and Richard were finally rescued. At this point, her heart was filled with excitement. As long as Laura released the footage she had taken with the camera, she would immediately become the discoverer of a new species. Jason, the military commander, found the elderly man he had met before. He hoped the man would tell him exactly what these recently appeared monsters were. They were so tough that not even lasers could cut through them. The man didn't give a direct answer. Instead, he pointed to a stone sculpture beside him. Then the old man told Jason a story from ancient Greek mythology. The figure in this sculpture was called Chimera. It was the offspring of Typhon, the 100-headed monster, and Echidna. It had the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and a tail made up of a python. It could breathe fire and had a very ferocious temperament. The old man seemed to be implying something. Jason fell into thought and remained silent. On the other side, although Nim had become a bit distrustful of Miles, because of their previous experiences, Miles still took good care of it diligently, but because Miles had been bitten by other monsters earlier, his condition was getting worse and worse. His injured leg could barely support him to walk normally. What was more, the wound seemed to have become infected. On his way to school, Miles always felt very weak. He broke out in a sweat in no time. During class, Miles couldn't concentrate at all. He felt like the whole world was spinning around him. The teacher thought Miles was dozing off in class. He immediately ordered Miles to stand up as a punishment. Unexpectedly, the weak Miles passed out on the spot. When he woke up again, he was already in the school infirmary. After a simple examination, the school doctor found that Miles' temperature was rising rapidly. The school doctor hurriedly sent him to the hospital. The medical staff put Miles into an ice bath. They tried to curb Miles' soaring temperature through physical means, but the effect wasn't obvious at all. The very high temperature sent Miles into a coma, but even in his coma, Miles still couldn't forget Nim. He kept calling out its name. The doctor issued a critical illness notice for Miles, but his parents were away on vacation and couldn't be reached no matter what. The only family member available at the moment was Miles' sister. After hearing the news, she was also plunged into shock and panic. Miles' sister decided to bring Nim to Miles to fulfill his last wish. Miles' sister had seen how her brother tamed Nim before, so she followed Miles' example and successfully lured Nim into a cage. Then she took the huge pet carrier and rushed to the hospital quickly. On the way, she happened to run into the aquarium director. The director was a little curious about the creature in the carrier, but when he checked, he found that Nim had broken out of the cage, and it was nowhere to be found. Thinking of the previous rumors about the monster attacking people, Miles' sister and the director immediately started searching everywhere. Unexpectedly, they found Nim in Miles' hospital room. It was lying beside Miles at this point. It kept licking his hideous wound. The sudden appearance of everyone seemed to have scared Nim. It immediately jumped off the hospital bed and fled the room quickly. At this very moment, Miles' heart rate suddenly flatlined on the monitor. The medical staff immediately started resuscitating him, but there was no effect at all. On the other side, Nim, who had escaped from the ward, was eventually cornered by the hospital security guards. The security guards pulled out their guns without hesitation. As the gunshots rang out, Miles, who had been in a coma, suddenly sat up in bed. He immediately went to look for Nim, but Nim had already fallen to the ground and passed out. Miles hugged Nim tightly, his heart filled with immense grief. The next day, Miles' sister was shocked to find that the wound on her brother's leg had completely healed without a trace. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she wouldn't have believed that Miles had almost died from it. Miles was equally astonished by this, but he had no mood to pay attention to this right now. Miles wandered to the aquarium in a daze, staring at Nim's body. Waves of emotion surged in his heart once again. Miles gently stroked Nim's body. He couldn't help but recall the wonderful time they had spent together. At this very moment, Miles suddenly felt that Nim seemed to move a little. Only then did he notice that the wounds on Nim's body had disappeared. Just as Miles was wondering about this, Nim suddenly jumped up from the ice, then it quickly scurried into a corner. Perhaps the events of yesterday had traumatized Nim once again. It was now very resistant to any contact with humans. Not even Miles could get close to it. Helpless, he had to leave Nim at the aquarium temporarily. On his way home, Miles kept thinking about what had happened to Nim. He didn't notice at all that every electrical device along his path was slightly interfered with. Apparently, for some unknown reason, Miles now had the same abilities as Nim. On the other side, Laura, who had been rescued from the sea, was also rushed to the hospital in an emergency. Although her condition was very critical at this point, Laura still clung tightly to the camera she had brought back from the seabed. Richard advised Laura to hand the camera over to the police for safekeeping, but Laura flatly refused. This was a secret that would shake the world. She didn't trust anyone else to take charge of it. Besides, there might even be Jason's men among these police officers. With Laura's reappearance, Jason, the military commander, immediately ordered his men to bring the two of them back at all costs. He knew full well the disastrous consequences that would ensue if the data Laura had brought back from that sea area were exposed to the public. At this point, Laura in the hospital could barely rest at all. She remained vigilant at all times, ready for any unexpected events. Just then, she saw a group of men in black approaching quietly outside the window. Laura immediately realized that these men were after the data in her possession. Without any hesitation, Laura took immediate action. She hid the data securely, then she disguised herself as a medical worker and escaped from the hospital together with Richard. Not long after, the men in black broke into the ward, only to find it completely empty. The men in black immediately scattered to search for Laura, but by then, the two of them had already escaped from the hospital. Not long after, Laura released the footage she had taken on a TV program, but people refused to believe it. Under Jason's deliberate guidance, the public opinion quickly shifted. Someone exposed that Laura had falsified her doctoral thesis before. They claimed that Laura was just a fame-crazed liar, and this so-called monster footage was nothing more than a farce staged by Laura herself. With Jason's manipulation, the sensation Laura had originally anticipated didn't happen at all. On the contrary, she had turned herself into a liar that everyone wanted to denounce. The two fell silent, not knowing what to do next. At this point, on a certain beach, a group of young people were immersed in a wild party. Then two bold young people quietly left the group and headed for the deep water area. At first, the other companions didn't pay much attention. It wasn't until they hadn't seen the two returned for a long time that they realized something unexpected might have happened to them. Several young people kept shouting the names of the two companions, but they never received any response. Just then, they saw bursts of blue-green light surging on the sea not far away. They immediately realized that something was wrong. They hurried to search around everywhere. It wasn't until the next day that they found the mutilated limbs of their companions in a corner somewhere. The young people were overwhelmed with grief at the sight, and this scene was witnessed by Miles, who was passing by. He quickly guessed what had happened, because just last night, Nim had also shown some unusual behaviors. The aquarium director told Miles that Nim had suddenly become very violent last night. It had attacked the staff members of the aquarium everywhere, and the time when Nim went berserk was exactly last night, the moment when those young people saw the blue-green light. Miles believed that this was by no means a coincidence. There must be some kind of connection between the two incidents. In order to find out what was really going on, Miles went to Nim's hiding place. He used the taming method he had used before to slowly lure Nim out of the corner. During their interaction, Miles didn't notice any changes in Nim. He didn't notice at all that his own pupils had turned into vertical slits like those of a lizard. But after Miles left, the changes in his body became more and more obvious. When he was having dinner with his girlfriend, he poured a large amount of salt into the dishes, but even so, Miles still thought the food was a bit too bland. Not long after, Miles accidentally discovered that he was actually just like Nim. His body surface secreted a lot of thick, transparent liquid, and just like Nim, he gradually began to like hot places. Every time Miles went out, the dogs would bark at him incessantly, but upon seeing his eyes, they would be scared into curling up. Miles realized that he was turning into a monster just like Nim. As these changes gradually appeared in his body, Nim seemed to gradually regard Miles as family. It was no longer as wary as before. Instead, it snuggled up to Miles very gently. It kept rubbing against his palms. Because of Jason's manipulation, Laura and the others were now regarded as liars that everyone wanted to denounce, just as the two were hiding in the hotel, wondering what to do next. A series of knocks suddenly came from outside the door. The person outside claimed to be a courier delivering a package, but neither of them had bought anything. Richard was the first to react. He quickly moved the sofa to block the door. Then he and Laura tied the bed sheets together, threw them down the building, and created the illusion of escaping by jumping off the building. In reality, both of them hid in the room. When those people broke down the door and rushed in, they saw the scene in front of them and, just as Richard had expected, quickly ran downstairs to chase after them. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Richard and Laura escaped through the emergency exit on the other side, but on the way, they accidentally encountered another pursuer. Luckily, there was only one person on the other side. Richard and Laura joined forces and quickly subdued the man. They also snatched his ID. Only then did the two realize that those pursuers were actually CIA agents. The two were very shocked by this news. Things had become increasingly complicated. Just as the two were on the run, Laura suddenly received a mysterious email. It actually contained a photo of that mysterious sea anemone. Laura had never disclosed this matter to anyone. She asked warily who the sender was, and how they knew about the sea anemone. Instead of replying in text, the person called Laura on a voice call. They claimed to be very interested in the matter of the monsters, and asked her how exactly she had sequenced the genes of this kind of creature. Laura didn't tell the other person everything. She only revealed that she had accidentally obtained several hagfishes, and then extracted the gene samples from the hagfish's stomachs. This explanation was very reasonable. The caller didn't ask any further questions. She told Laura to bring the gene samples to a certain location for a meeting later. Laura refused this request on the spot. After all, they didn't know each other at all. If this mysterious person was also with the CIA, they would be walking right into a trap. After hearing this, the mysterious person immediately sent a photo to Laura. After seeing what was in the photo, a look of horror involuntarily appeared on both Laura and Richard's faces. Because it was actually a satellite photo of Laura and Richard, the other person had been keeping them under surveillance all along. The mysterious person used this method to prove that they had no intention of harming the two of them. Then the mysterious person told Laura and Richard that they could go to a certain library to get the items she had left there. These items would help the two of them escape from being hunted. The next day, Laura and Richard followed the clues provided by the mysterious person. They found a bag in a certain library. It was actually filled with various passports and a credit card, with a huge sum of money in the account. With the help of the mysterious person, Laura and Richard successfully shook off the CIA manhunt. They arrived at the location provided by the mysterious person. A plane was waiting for the two of them there. The other person asked Richard to stay there. Then Laura was blindfolded and taken away. After an unknown period of time, Laura saw light again. By then, she had arrived in a room filled with all kinds of experimental equipment. Many of the high-end devices in it were things that Laura had only ever heard of. At this point, the mysterious person finally appeared in front of her. The person didn't reveal their name, only calling themselves Doctor. Then she told Laura a shocking secret.
Those are my artificial chromosomes in your new vertebrate.
Laura was instantly stunned by this piece of information. According to what the doctor said, many years ago, she had just obtained her doctoral dissertation when she received an interview invitation from a genetic company. The doctor herself specialized in genetic recombination research, so she readily accepted the invitation. When she arrived at the company, the other person didn't ask any professional questions at all. Instead, they pulled out a check and told the doctor to fill in any amount she wanted. According to what the interviewer said, they had been keeping an eye on the doctor for a long time. They thought her dissertation topic was highly compatible with the company's current project, so they sincerely invited the doctor to join them. But the company's project was a top-secret matter. Therefore, after joining the company, the doctor would have to live in an area designated by the company. She was prohibited from contacting the outside world. To prove that they weren't liars, the interviewer showed the doctor an ancient dinosaur that the company had cloned not long before. So the doctor gladly joined this mysterious company. During this period, the doctor took on many tasks, but they were all just parts of a huge genome, making it impossible for her to figure out what exactly they were working on. In addition, all the researchers employed by the company were prohibited from contacting each other. They were also rotated to different positions regularly. It wasn't until recently that the doctor saw Laura's investigation into that mysterious sea monster on the news. She immediately recognized that one of the gene sequences was exactly the one she had edited. Only then did she realize that the mysterious sea monster was the company's so-called top-secret project. The reason she arranged for Laura to come here was simply that she wanted to see what kind of monster she had designed. Laura asked curiously about the company's name. She only heard the doctor say the word Luren before passing out. It turned out that the doctor had put a sedative in the tea that Laura drank earlier. When she woke up again, she found herself in a desolate wilderness. She hurried to meet up with Richard. She told him everything she had learned from the doctor. Richard was instantly rooted to the spot in shock. He had never imagined that the creature that killed his brother was actually man-made. After leaving that area, the two immediately searched the internet for the company called Luren, but apart from a genetic drug from 60 years ago, they found nothing else. Besides, most of the drug's instructions had been deliberately concealed. It was clear that the Luren Corporation wasn't as simple as it appeared. To uncover the truth behind it, the two decided to go to the pharmaceutical company to investigate, but they were driven away by the company staff before they even got through the door. Seeing that they couldn't get in through official channels, Laura and Richard instead looked for an opportunity to sneak into the company. But when they saw the situation inside, they couldn't help but frown, because the interior of the Luren Corporation seemed to have been abandoned long ago. Not a single staff member was in sight. Moreover, they seemed to have evacuated in a great hurry. There were still half-eaten apples on the desks. It looked like they had only been gone for a few hours. Only rows of mechanical equipment that the two had never seen before were left in the factory. As they went further inside, Richard found a large amount of bloodstains somewhere. It seemed that a fierce battle had taken place here. He carefully entered the area to check, and found that the water on the table was still warm. This made him even more certain that there were people here just a few hours ago. Suddenly, Richard heard the cry of a little girl coming from not far away. She was shouting for her mother. Richard hurried over to check. It was a dim corner. Richard kept comforting the girl inside. At the same time, he reached out his hand to pull her. But the next second, Richard finally realized the girl's voice he heard just now was actually made by this orangutan. It seemed to have been traumatized by something and kept attacking Richard. Luckily, Laura arrived in time and quickly shot and wounded the orangutan. This saved Richard's life. After this incident, the two deeply realized that the weirdness hidden in the Luren Corporation was far beyond their imagination. But even so, the two still didn't give up their plan to investigate. Laura took a group photo of the Luren Corporation's senior management that she had found in the company. She sent it to the doctor via email. She asked the doctor who the person in charge of the Luren Corporation was. The doctor didn't answer right away. Instead, she warned Laura that this would put her in unimaginable danger. But Laura was determined at this point. In the end, the doctor told her that she could find out everything she wanted to know in a library called Berkeley. The doctor then cut off the communication. Just then, a black shadow appeared behind the doctor. It was none other than Jason, the military commander. The doctor lied, claiming that she was sending an email to her family. After all, she hadn't seen them for so long that her heart was filled with longing. Jason seemed to believe the doctor's story. He didn't pursue the matter of her contacting the outside world without permission. At the same time, in the small town where Miles lived, people were plagued by increasingly frequent monster attacks, yet the government had been doing nothing about it. The residents set up a mutual aid committee to fight against the mysterious monster together. In order to track the whereabouts of those sea monsters, the aquarium director planned to attach a tracker to Nim and then release it back into the sea. He entrusted this task to Miles, who was the person Nim trusted the most. This put Miles in a dilemma. He didn't want to hurt Nim, but many people in the town had been injured because of the monster attacks. Miles didn't want any more such incidents to happen. In the end, he still followed the director's instructions and attached the tracker to Nim. Then he released it back into the sea. This matter was soon learned by Miles' girlfriend. She thought that Nim had always regarded Miles as a friend. Now his actions were undoubtedly a betrayal of Nim. Many people couldn't meet someone they could trust in their whole lives, but Miles had personally destroyed all of this. Upon hearing this, Miles came to his senses again. He decided to stop the townspeople from hurting Nim. According to the tracker, Nim and the other sea monsters would land in the town from somewhere soon, so the residents armed themselves to the teeth. They were ready to kill all of them as soon as Nim and the others appeared. Not long after, a young monster emerged from the water. The residents immediately opened fire with all their might. A man proudly showed off to everyone that he had killed a monster, but the next second, the critically injured young sea monster suddenly launched an attack. The man instantly became the monster's meal. The residents were stunned by this terrifying scene and fled from the monsters one after another. The young sea monsters quickly rushed onto the land and surrounded the humans who had hunted them earlier. At this critical moment, Miles arrived just in time. The young sea monsters instantly turned docile and stopped attacking the humans around them. Miles removed the tracker from Nim's body. He persuaded it to return to the sea. Perhaps understanding what Miles meant, the young sea monsters actually all returned to the sea. The surrounding residents looked at Miles, who was mingling with the sea monsters, with mixed feelings. At the same time, following the clues provided by the doctor, Laura and Richard found a 60-year-old videotape in the Berkeley Library. It recorded the process of a team of researchers going somewhere to investigate a meteorite crater. Laura was shocked to discover that the plants growing beside the meteorite crater were exactly the sea anemones she had kept in the refrigerator earlier. Then she noticed that among the researchers, there was a man who looked very much like Jason, the military commander, and this was simply impossible, if calculated. According to the time of the video, the man in it should be at least 100 years old, but Jason didn't seem to have changed at all. To find out what was really going on, Laura began to search for records of the researcher named Kester. Then she saw Kester's name again in another research report, from 50 years ago. According to the records, it was during this expedition that people mastered the method of altering and creating genes. Later, Laura and Richard kidnapped Jason when he was alone, watching the videotape. Jason also looked very surprised, but he quickly came up with a guess. Perhaps he was just a clone of that man. After all, this wasn't a difficult task at all for the Luren Corporation. Later, through interrogating Jason, Laura and Richard finally learned that the sea monsters were indeed created by the Luren Corporation. Many years ago, a leak occurred at the Luren Corporation. The experimental subjects took the opportunity to escape into the sea and multiplied rapidly. Jason claimed that he had been ordered by the Luren Corporation to hunt down Laura and the others. Upon hearing this, the anger pent up in Richard's heart erupted completely, so he gave Jason a beating. In the chaos, Jason's phone fell to the ground. It contained not only his call records with the senior management of the Luren Corporation, but also the location of a Luren Corporation base. Richard and Laura set off right away, but on the way there, the two had a quarrel over something. Laura thought that Richard had acted too violently and completely lost his senses. In the end, the two parted ways. Laura chose to go back to take care of her son. Only Richard went to the company base alone. Taking advantage of the cover of night, Richard successfully sneaked into the factory. Here, he saw a lot of refrigeration equipment. It stored the genes of almost all living things on Earth. It was like the legendary Noah's Ark. Just as Richard was about to further investigate what the Luren Corporation was plotting, he was discovered by the security personnel, subdued on the spot, and thrown into a detention room. But Richard didn't give up because of this. He created an opportunity to attack the guard and snatched his phone. He told Laura about his situation. Following Richard's instructions, Laura came to this base. From the surveillance footage, she saw the staff sending those gene sequences to the depths of the seabed via a monorail train. Apparently, there was another base there, but Laura didn't have time to think about that now. After a series of random attempts, she finally managed to open the base's access control and successfully freed Richard. The two quickly fled outside the base and flagged down a car at random. Unexpectedly, it was Miles who was driving. Just one day ago, Miles had helped the town drive away the young sea monsters, but his strange behavior had aroused people's concerns. There were also some people who blamed Miles totally for their family members being injured by the sea monsters. As a result, he was bullied by his classmates at school. One of the school bullies not only made things difficult for Miles everywhere, but also physically assaulted him. Just as Miles was about to be strangled to death by the bully, the power within him suddenly erupted. Miles became as strong as a sea monster. He could even control blue-green electric pulses. The bully was electrocuted and fell to the ground on the spot. At this point, Miles almost lost his mind, and only madness and bloodlust remained in his heart. He kept beating the unconscious bully. If the exclamations of the crowd hadn't sobered Miles up in time, the bully would have been killed by him. After this incident, Miles realized that his staying here would only bring more trouble to the residents, so after going back home, he packed his things and planned to leave the town forever. Unexpectedly, at this point, the bully's parents suddenly showed up at his door with the police. They claimed that Miles had almost killed their son. They demanded that the police arrest and prosecute him. Miles' father didn't believe that his son would do such a thing, so he refused to cooperate with the police. A conflict broke out between the two families because of this. Just then, an emergency announcement suddenly interrupted the town's radio broadcast. A tsunami would hit the town in one day. Everyone was told to pack their things immediately and evacuate the area. People heard that a tsunami was coming soon, and no longer pursued the matter of Miles almost killing someone. They all hurried back to their homes to pack their belongings. In an instant, the roads and stations were filled with crowds fleeing the town. Miles' family also packed their things, but before setting off, Miles was still worried about his girlfriend, so he gave her a call. Unluckily, no one answered the phone the whole time. Miles thought she was still angry with him, so he didn't think much more and followed his family to the port, planning to leave the town by boat. In fact, his girlfriend had already forgiven Miles. She was on her way to Miles' house at this point. When she arrived, the house was already empty. To make matters worse, a thief stole her car. Miles' girlfriend chased after the thief at once, but was pushed to the ground by him. Her head hit a stone and she fell into a coma. When Miles' family arrived at the port, they happened to meet his girlfriend's family. Only then did Miles learn that his girlfriend had gone to look for him. Shortly after, Miles saw the thief driving his girlfriend's car appear at the port. Miles grabbed the thief by the neck and forced him to tell where his girlfriend was. After listening to the thief's account, Miles resolutely jumped off the boat and swam back to the port, ignoring his family's dissuasion to look for his girlfriend. When Miles returned to his residence, he was surprised to find Nim there too. With its help, Miles soon found his unconscious girlfriend lying by the roadside. The tsunami was approaching. The two had no time to linger, and quickly got into a nearby car, heading for higher ground. On the way, Miles accidentally met Laura and Richard. The two storylines finally converged. Laura was shocked beyond words when she saw Nim in the back seat. The monster she had been searching for was actually being raised as a pet by the boy in front of her. During their conversation, Miles learned that there were many much larger sea monsters deep in the ocean. They would surely attack the town along with the tsunami. The expressions on the faces of the four grew increasingly grave. Just then, the car ran out of gas, and the tsunami was already right around the corner. Helplessly, the four had to rush into a nearby church at once. This was the highest point in the town. As the seawater surged in violently, the four finally managed to reach the top floor of the church, thus escaping the tsunami's assault. Before the four could catch their breath, a huge sea monster suddenly emerged from the water the next second. Somehow, Miles' uniqueness seemed to make the sea monster mistake him for one of its own kind. After lingering for a short while, the giant sea monster left the church. When the tsunami finally stopped, the whole town was completely submerged by seawater. The once dry land had turned into a vast expanse of water. A brand new world unfolded before their eyes. The film ended here. Surface was released in September 2005, as a film made 20 years ago. The special effects of the young sea monsters in it were very vivid. Even today, they still reach a moderate standard. Besides, the film's concept remains highly distinctive to this day. There are very few similar designs. As for the plot, some plot lines were overly contrived. The plot logic was relatively weak. The two storylines had almost no connection with each other. The final ending also felt a bit rushed. If you like my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.